Joining me now is Democratic Congressman from Colorado, Jason Crow. He is a member of the House Intelligence and Foreign Affairs Committee. So thank you so much, Congressman, for being here.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So earlier this month, you led a letter from more than 80 House Democrats to President Biden urging him to consider halting the sale of offensive weapons to Israel, citing concerns about aid getting into Gaza. The administration, of course, is now moving forward with this new $1 billion sales of arms and ammunition to Israel. Do you think the president is taking your concerns seriously here? And do you see this move by the president as rewarding Israel's actions by sending even more weapons to the country?
Well, the group of members that wrote that letter about a week ago, we are very concerned with what we view as a deeply flawed strategy in Gaza. If you look at what's happened over the last 6 months, almost 40,000 people have been killed. There are 1.1 million Palestinians who are on the verge of famine or have entered a stage of starvation, according to all the food and aid groups. And what we also see is that Hamas has not been destroyed. In fact, I would argue that there's been very little progress towards effectively destroying Hamas, the terrorist organization, which I firmly believe must be destroyed. But you're already seeing in North Gaza, when the IDF pulls out after conducting these offensive operations, Hamas is already recapitalizing. They're already popping back up. So clearly the strategy is not working, which is why we voiced our deep concern and why we want a very drastic shift.
Well, as you talk about the shift that you want, there were more than 24 House Democrats who sent a letter to the White House who were critical of the weapons shipments pause, meaning that they wanted to see those weapons go to Israel. What do you make of this split within the Democratic Party, your party?
Well, here's the deal. I want to provide some context. The United States provides weapons and equipment, munitions to over 60 countries around the world. Right? 7 of those are currently in armed conflict, Israel being one, Ukraine being another. In every single instance, every time, with every country, with every shipment, there are restrictions and limitations on those transfers. Why? Because the United States doesn't give these weapons and equipment out of charity. Right? They give it because we give it, and the American taxpayers support it because it's in our self-interest to do so. And it's the American people's money, and it should serve our interests. So there are always restrictions, there are always limitations on it. And with respect to Israel, let's give some history here. Dwight Eisenhower put limitations and withheld transfers in 1953. President Reagan did it in 1981, and again in 1982. President George H.W. Bush did it in 1992. So there's a long history of this being done to help shape better policy. And that's what we're calling for, is for us to support defensive aid, because we want to be able to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend against attacks like Iran and others, but making sure that the offensive aid is better tailored to pursue better ends.
Well, as you talk about the offensive aid versus the defensive aid, I think the other thing we need to note here is that House Republicans are now planning a vote on legislation that would force the Biden administration to continue weapons transfers to Israel. The president said he would veto that bill, but I wonder, how would you vote on that legislation? And are you worried that that legislation has the votes it needs to pass? Do you think it has the votes there?
I don't know whether it has the votes. I will fiercely oppose that legislation. It's a very dangerous piece of legislation that sets a precedent that should not be set. And again, I think it's inconsistent with the interests of the American people and the American taxpayer. And I think it's inconsistent with the security interests of the people of Israel, who are not being well served by Prime Minister Netanyahu in this current military strategy that is doing great harm to Israel right now and not actually achieving the goal of dismantling Hamas.
I also want to play for you some of what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today during a sit-down with CNBC. Take a listen.
I paraphrase it. A nation's got to do what a nation's got to do. And today we can.
But can you win this fight without American support?
Well, the answer is yes. Although we value American support, we want American support, I'll do everything that I can to get American support, but not at the expense of our survival and our security. When we have to, we stand alone. And against these savages, we have to win. We don't have a choice.
Now, President Biden said a major assault into Rafah would be his red line. We all, of course, remember, though, President Biden's red line when it came to the Assad regime in Syria. What should the consequences be, in your opinion, if Israel were to go forward with a major offensive in Rafah?
Well, first of all, I need to comment on Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments just there. It's beyond absurd in my view. First of all, American military support is essential for Israel's peace and security, and that's why I have historically supported it. But Prime Minister Netanyahu has failed the people of Israel in almost every conceivable way. Right? Let's not forget that it was his failure on October 7th that set off this whole conflict and failed the people of Israel. And there's been no accountability for Prime Minister Netanyahu there. So certainly he has lost all legitimacy in my mind. So what I believe, and I've communicated this to the administration and to President Biden and his advisors, is that a ground offensive, a large-scale conventional ground offensive into Rafah would be devastating for Israel's security. It would be devastating for the people in Rafah, for the Palestinians. It would exacerbate what is already a terrible humanitarian catastrophe. It would result in untenable levels of civilian casualties that would actually make the security situation worse for everybody. So we certainly shouldn't support that with our munitions, and that's my longstanding view.
I want to ask you before you go about the issues going on in Ukraine. Ukraine's army says that it's withdrawing troops from around the Kharkiv region in response to this new offensive by Russia. It is unlikely, it seems, that Congress will appropriate any more money for Ukraine, given all of the fights that went in with the last aid package. Given that, how does Ukraine turn the tide in this war and really fend off Russia long term in this situation?
Well, there's no doubt this is a really critical time, and the consequences of some of my colleagues politicizing this aid and delaying it over 6 months are being seen on the battlefield right now, because the support that we appropriated just a couple of weeks ago has not yet arrived on the battlefield. The Ukrainians are fighting with incredible bravery and resilience, but they don't yet have the weapons and equipment that we have provided to them, so they are defending very fiercely. But here's the other thing, Yamish. Every single time people have said, Ukrainians are on the ropes, Ukrainians are going to be defeated, Ukrainians can't address this assault or this offensive, every single time people have underestimated the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have prevailed. Right? And they have overcome odds after odds after odds, because they are some of the most courageous and resilient and brave fighters I have ever seen. So never underestimate the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people, certainly not in this instance. That's why we should continue to support them, because they will win at the end of this.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman, for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.